Traditional video game level structure goes like this: introduction, explanation of anything specific to the level itself, obstacles, maybe a set piece, recently, and then a boss. A boss is meant to be the high point of the level, the thing that truly 100% defines the level. But what defines that battle itself? Why does it matter so much? Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx we ask the question, what makes a good boss fight? So I mentioned level structure for a reason. I didn't just say, oh, I need to fill up some time in that intro and level structure is something that leads up to the boss, so I'll just mention it and that's that. Obviously, open world games don't have so much levels as they may have sectors or areas, but the principle is very similar. The level or area you are currently in either has a theme or some specific trait that's important for that area to be distinct in its own way. The reason why these things matter is when you're in that area, one has to figure out exactly what is specific to it and learn how to do that thing. Oftentimes there are new mechanics introduced in a level that are specific to that level, and it may be due to some sort of design thing or maybe just specific to the climate that was chosen for that area. For instance, an ice level might contain sliding mechanics or snow that collects and makes it so you move slower. In a lava level, there may be things that allow you to float on the lava or avoid the lava, or indeed it might be specifically important to avoid some sort of stream of lava that comes every once in a while and changes up the dynamics. A level built on mechanics that distinguish the level or area, if you're in an open world game, depending on, how it's set up, is good game design. When there's a reason for an area or level to exist, when places and areas have a purpose, that is, the chances of it seeming superfluous or unnecessary in some way are very low. When everything fulfills some sort of reason or purpose, and continues to progress the game, introducing new things that the player has to learn and learn to cope with as well, that means the game always gives the player something to feel accomplished about when they do. Think about it. If a game started off with you having everything, having the capability to do everything, and never having to deal with any new challenges, there would be no point to the game. This, in my opinion, brings us to the first point that makes a boss battle good: challenge. And not just that the boss battle is challenging, because certainly it's possible to make something that's very difficult and place it at the end of an area, but the challenge has to be specific to the theme and new mechanics that you just learned. The Legend of Zelda series has always been a good example of how this works. When Link goes into a new dungeon, he often finds a new item. Through this item, he acquires a new ability or a new attack, something that changes up the game a little bit or a lot, and the boss often incorporates this. For instance, in Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, the boss in the Eastern Palace is a group of 6 Armos Knights. Now this boss is beatable with the sword, and you can do it that way if you want. However, it is much easier because of how these knights move to use the bow and arrow that you found in the same dungeon. You probably used the bow and arrow some during the dungeon. There are areas where it certainly works out better than others. The skills that you learn, you can apply to that boss fight. Now, it's not meant to be an incredibly hard boss fight, as it is the first dungeon master fight in the game, but given Link's relatively low power level, a beginner to the game normally has a difficulty beating it that seems to just magically disappear when you have the bow and arrow and know what you're doing with it. Now that was a good boss fight. It's a bit of a warm-up, but the first time you do it, it's a new experience. It takes skills you learned and mechanics that you acquired and furthers your understanding of the game itself. It feels like a natural progression of the dungeon, as it is all sort of ramped up to a specific challenge. That specific challenge makes perfect sense, and it also prepares you for further challenges in the future, creating the expectation of a large fight based on the kind of mechanics that you just learned. That challenge derives context from the area around you. But there's another thing that makes a boss fight good, and it's not always what makes the boss fight good, but it's something that really helps in more narrative-oriented games. How the boss fits into the narrative, what kind of character they are, what their motivations are, what their personality is. A boss's character traits can be something that makes a boss significantly more interesting. Earlier in the story, did this boss have some sort of antagonistic interaction with you? Did they criticize your character or where your character comes from, or do they have some sort of motivation that is clear against your character? These things create stakes, and I don't mean like a well-seasoned medium-cooked steak or something like that. I mean stakes like investment, specifically emotional investment on the part of both the character you're playing as and yourself as a player. You feel as though there is a good reason to beat them. You have a vested interest in beating them. It is a concern of yours that they have not been beaten yet. And the amount of relief that you feel, the amount of satisfaction that you feel all comes together to make beating that boss into something that actually makes facing the peril worthwhile. Yes, there is certainly an element of risk-reward that makes a boss worthwhile to fight. Sometimes you get the satisfaction of beating something that's difficult, sometimes you get in-game items, sometimes you get in-game currency, but if any of that takes place alongside an emotional investment on your part, then the win specifically can contribute to the progression of characterization. Basically what I'm saying, there's two elements to a good boss: challenge and stakes. And it's not even necessarily that you definitely need both in order to have a good boss, but I'd be willing to bet that pretty much every good video game boss can be described as either a good challenge or has high stakes. The challenge needs to be proportionate to the things that you have experienced leading up to the challenge. It has to make sense contextually and build on any mechanics that have been added in the lead up. And if there's an element of stakes in the equation, these stakes have to be high, either emotionally or contextually in some other way. For the stakes to be high, the narrative has to make some sort of sense as to why this matters. In fact, that's probably the best way to describe high stakes. This matters. The boss has to matter to describe it as a high stakes battle. Ideally, you would want a challenging boss that is high stakes. To have both would be the ideal best possible boss, at least in my opinion. But that doesn't mean the best boss is definitely going to be something that has narrative significance as well as a appropriate, interesting challenge. There are exceptions to every rule, and I'm not going to say that the best example of a boss couldn't be an exception. However, all of the most memorable bosses for me usually end up being one or more of these two things. Now, the player doesn't necessarily need to know any of this in order to get these things out of it. In fact, the less a player is thinking about the contextual makeup of the design of the game, the better. That would mean that they're more absorbed in the game, so these are things that some developers probably could use a little more conscious thought about, but I'm sure there's quite a few developers that don't specifically think about things this way. That being said, considering challenge and the stakes involved when making a boss battle probably isn't going to hurt the boss battle. Run through a few of your favorite boss battles, the ones that you really enjoy, and try to think, does this apply to them? If so, leave us a comment, tell us exactly what you're thinking about, and if you like this video, please click the like button. If you're not subscribed, now would be a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week, and the best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription. As always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at FalconTheHero, and we'll see you next time right here on gameranx.